everybody, this is Perch. Like some of the videos that I've been doing lately have been talking about, there is going to be a renewed focus on all ages and YA, and which many of you may be saying, "Well, wait a minute, there has been a focus. What are you talking about? We've had more than enough focus. There's been no shortage of focus. Yeah, but so I guess maybe a better word might be there's going to be successes in all ages and YA within the comic publishers and everything else. The funny thing is they've accomplished it before. Like the video I did on Star Comics that Marvel had, there was success in basically creating content for kids. There was not a lot of fanfare. They didn't have USA Today articles blasting out everywhere talking about this. They just created content that was designed to be, one, appropriate for kids, two, something that was going to act as a gateway into more comic reading. I don't see a lot of videos and comments about this, and it probably is a whole other topic, but the amount of people who started reading comics because of either Star Wars, G.I. Joe, or Transformers from Marvel, if you look at their growth, if you look at what Marvel did in the 70s, and particularly the 80s, there is undeniable proof that people came in from those comics and basically stayed for decades. A lot of people trace their origins back to one of those three books, in particular GI Joe. And if you read GI Joe, it's not like it's a bunch of simpering idiots. There's still people with guns. There's shooting people. There's murder, there's armies, there's weapons, there's serious conversations. I remember as a kid, it's like, Destro is up to some shenanigans, some Eastern European country, and the Baroness is there. And they're like, this wasn't dumbed down to, Dogman like levels of simplistic, me shoot now and you go home. There wasn't this, everybody has to be friends at the end. There wasn't any of this. It was pretty, you could argue that a lot of the G.I. Joe comics back then would be considered, grown up comics today. They're about the same mentality. I mean, I don't know. If you're reading Strange Academy, for example, that Marvel puts out, which is a fine book, but it is geared toward, a 20 up audience. Teen Titans Academy, which is DC trying to do the same thing, is clearly geared toward above 20s. They have this crack in the first issue about Nightwing goes, okay, it's Defense Against the Dark Arts, and nobody laughs, and he's like, oh, well, was it not funny? You don't know that book? And the kid's like, oh, we know that book. It's just problematic to talk about this book. That's appealing to 20, 30-year-old Twitter people. That's not a teen audience. But the writing of those books is arguably more immature, more, dumbed down than Transformers and G.I. Joe was back, 40 years ago. But we are going to see a better focus on this because there is money there. And it's one of those things that stares you in the face. And the question is not, will they, won't they? The question is, why have they been screwing it up so far? I like to talk about Primer as an example because I think Primer is one of those just very obvious successes that, and this is no knock to the creative team whatsoever. They're doing logical things. They're basically, they have a character, they build the character up carefully, they have the character involved in a bunch of scenarios that kids can relate to, but the book doesn't talk down to you. The book doesn't have like, I'm just a kid, so I need to talk in small words. There's none of that. It's written like a adventure story. It really reminds me of things that were written in the 80s, frankly, that just treated kids as intelligent and put out a book designed to entertain and get them excited. And that's it. There's not the book does not feel the need weirdly in the middle of it to suddenly want to address social issues or anything else. It just sticks to what it's there to do, which is to tell an adventure story. Now, just so everybody is 100% clear in what I'm saying, because I'm trying to build a bigger point. I'm not saying that books should never address social issues or that you can't have mixed race, mixed sexuality couples or anything else. You should have those things, absolutely. but you don't need to have it be a checklist that you have to work down every single title. And what has been happening from Marvel and DC in particular is it feels like there's a checklist that's given to the creator. It's like, well, before we have this to start this issue, we're going to have to deal with prejudice. We're going to have to deal with racial insensitivities. We're going to have to deal with different gender identities. We're going to have to deal with same-sex couples, and you're going to have to do all this. And the person who's writing the book is like, cool. My pitch was for a magician teddy bear that fights in a candy rainbow land, but sure, I'll figure out how to get that stuff in there. Sure, and it it often feels incredibly awkward, and it feels awkward to the point where two things happen. Number one, the story suffers as a result. It's clear that the author is not sure what they're doing with this stuff and how to put it in, but they're being pushed to do it. And number two, and this is the real key point, and this is not one of those, is it fair or not fair? I'm not. This is just reality. I mean, this is one of those. The world is not always the world we want. I wish that we had a high-speed rail system like Japan does. Absolutely, God, it's so wonderful. But we do not in the U.S. And there's geographic reasons why that is, and everything else, and it's expensive here, and lots of reasons. I wish it was true, but it's not. I'm not gonna, live in this kind of fantasy land where I just constantly complain that something that's not true isn't true. But this is a real factor here, and it's one of the reasons why Marvel and DC have struggled in their YA all ages book efforts. It's that you've got to get parents on board with buying this stuff. And maybe you would like to have a society where the parents are all into all the progressive issues and they're all the rest, but they're not. And forgetting about any of that other stuff, if you have an all ages book, like let's say Primer, in that book decided to have a romantic subplot where the girl gets a boyfriend and there's a lot of kissing and holding hands and a big romance in the middle of the book, it would have done worse. It would have done worse because parents who are looking for some all ages light, they don't want to deal with any of that kind of stuff. It would have taken away sales. Now, by the way, you may say, well, who cares about sales? It's important to discuss these things. It's important to put that in there. Okay, sure. Except the problem that you have is that when the book doesn't sell, they don't give that author more work. They don't continue it. They don't do sequels. They don't give you more. And so you have these one-off stories, these orphans, that never really go anywhere and largely get forgotten. And so it's a factor that you may like, you may hate, but it's just true that you can't, when you're trying to sell to an audience that is, say, 6 to 12, you need to try and have a good adventure story that does not, if it's going to deal with social issues, it needs to deal with it in an age-appropriate way where the kids can understand it, where the parents are going to feel comfortable giving the book to the kids and then walking away and letting the kids read it. And that's another factor here is if you put too much of that in there, the parent's going to feel like they have to sit there and monitor the book and explain it and read it. And on top of that, if the kid doesn't understand those concepts, the kid is going to reject it. And that's how kids are. That's just what exists. DC has this Nubia book that is out, and it has a number of different topics, from school shootings to same-sex relationships to racism and all the rest. And the challenge there is that if you are if your parents are not just going to hand this book to their kids and say, go have fun, or worse, and this is, I think, the nightmare for a lot of publishers, is a parent does do that and then realizes later when the kid's asking them about school shootings, what did you just read? And then the parent goes on this angry rampage on social media or the news or anything else. And they're terrified of that. So they will not promote those books. They'll tend to walk away from them. This is just, again, the world we live in. I think that there's kind of a light bulb that's going off, particularly if you look at the Amazon bestseller list and you look at it for manga and you look at it for Western comics, US comics, and you look at what's selling to kids, what are the graphic novels. If you go to Marvel, you have a ton of very polished 5-minute stories for Marvel. And one of those stories is the Avengers. It's Avengers 5-minute stories. And if you've never seen these, it's text, there's lots of pictures, and it's designed that you can read this as a bedtime story in 5 minutes to your kid, and then you can go off and drink while your kid goes to sleep. That's what they're there for. The 5-minute stories, the Avengers, which I've read to my daughter many times, has an Ant-Man story in it. In the Ant-Man story, things they do not cover is, spousal abuse, Hank Pym beating his wife. They don't deal with mental instability of Hank Pym having a nervous breakdown. They don't deal with Scott Lang being in prison. They don't deal with Scott Lang being murdered during Avengers Disassembled or coming back to life later. They don't deal with Cassie, aging up and being in a relationship and then aging back down again. They don't deal with any of that stuff. And I mean, duh, yeah, of course not. Because the last thing Disney wants to do is have some book out there and have some parent at bedtime reading along and then having to kind of explain why Hank Pym is beating his wife. They don't want to have to explain that. It's not age appropriate, which is like I'm sorry, it's like a no shit moment, right? This shouldn't be a big shock to people. Yet we've seen these YA all ages efforts go out where they want to address that kind of stuff because the author cares about it. And none of this is saying it's not an important topic. Spousal abuse, domestic violence, it's a very serious thing, very bad. You don't put that in an all ages book. It's not it's not going to sell. You're going to confuse the kids. It's just that's not the right venue to do it. I would argue, and this is again another one of those duh kind of moments, maybe just perhaps if you're going to introduce the concept of racism and safety and domestic violence and some of these more serious topics to an 8-year-old, maybe the best venue to do that is not with a guy who could shrink himself to the size of an ant and his girlfriend, wife can fly around with wasp wings. Maybe that's not the best context in which to address domestic violence to kids. Just saying. I think that, with the Penguin Random House deal, with kind of people just kind of waking up and going, hey, we can't help but notice that on the Amazon bestseller list, Primer, which has been out for a while now, continues to be at the top of the charts. It continues to sell really well. And all of our, YA stuff, our other YA stuff is way down the list. Why is that? Well, because Primer is accessible. You can pick up that book, you can give it to your kid, you can walk away, kid has a good time. Concepts there are interesting, engaging, sparks their imagination, doesn't lead to bizarre conversations at night. That's why it's succeeding. And at the end of the day, as much as different companies want to address social issues and do their thing, they also require money. And I've said this before, and people in the comments will come in and go, "Oh, if that's true, then how come Marvel does this and this and this?" Some things take a long time, no doubt about it. There's been trends, there's been efforts in publishers that have taken 15 to 20 years to cycle through. It's not going to change overnight, but at the end of the day, yeah, the publisher does need to make money. There's a big reason why back in 2017, Marvel put a bunch of new, bold authors. They did a big imprint and a big initiative. And by and large, almost all of those authors are gone today. Their books didn't particularly sell. Eventually they got canceled. They moved on. And yes, then they tried new efforts that haven't sold. And this cycle of life continues. But if you look at what's being prioritized, if you look there, and I mentioned manga earlier, look at manga all age work. Manga has no shortage of hentai and girls getting their clothes ripped off, and certainly lots of LGBTQ issues and relationships in manga. It's tons. Go look up BL on Google and see what you can find there. There's plenty there. However, the stuff that is being marketed to all ages is the very, very benign content. I mean, my kids love One Piece, but One Piece isn't even marketed to young adults all ages there, because you got Nami out there who ate the boob fruit, and yeah, that was a fun conversation, by the way. We went through the time skip, and my daughters are like, "What happened to Nami?" Like, she's inflated. Like, yeah, it's 2 years up on that Sky Island. It lot of changes took place from old Nami. So it's like, okay. it's These are things you face as a dad. We're gonna head to an era where all ages, young adult is getting sharper. We're seeing that already in what's being prioritized and what's being marketed and what's being pushed. Penguin Random House will accelerate that to some extent. It's a great market, and I say this for if you're sitting there and you're going, I am bored by this topic because what I like is the Punisher, and I enjoy I don't like the all ages stuff. It's not for me. Well, if you're a late 20s, 30-year-old person, then yeah, that's true. It isn't for you, but you should still hope it exists and hope it is good quality, because the kids that are coming in and reading this stuff and getting hooked on comics is the next generation that's going to continue to pump cash and investment into this space and are going to, keep this hobby alive. When you are 60, you're still going to get the Punisher because they got kids into comics when they were 8 and now they're 20 and they're hooked. That's why you should be very interested in what's going on with YA and all ages. It does map to you eventually. Not the books themselves, but that audience and that market does. And if the publishers, put out stuff that completely miss the audience, and the parents won't buy it, and the kids don't get exposed to it, and they just won't read it, then eventually, like a dying tree, it will rot for you as well. Eventually, it will just work its way up, less and less money. They start paying creators less. You start getting substandard kind of quality. It becomes more niche. It starts to really appeal to just one part of the fan base that is extremely narrow. That's bad long term, and that frankly is that's a pretty clear description of kind of what's gone on. We did not have a good process in the early 2000s, in the late 90s, early 2000s. We did not have a good get into comics mode for kids. And, here we are now, 20 years later, this is the consequence. So I'm looking forward to that getting restored. I do think Penguin Random House does it. I think DC is showing some signs that they're getting it of what works and what doesn't. That's good. And, hopefully others will as well. What's your thought on all this? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe. And thanks for listening.